All right, we'll go ahead and get started, everyone. I'm so glad that you're here with us tonight. While I'm talking, if you have not already downloaded Blender onto your computer, please go ahead and do so. It is a free software, and you can download it at www.blender.org/download. My name is Bethany Harris. I know some of the attendees in the audience, so welcome. Good to see you here again. I work with Fulton County's Public Art Futures Lab, which is a new art and technology initiative in the county. We have an artist residency program, we host special events, and we also host workshops like tonight's class. Our goal is to exhibit and experiment with art and technology, all while increasing access to the field for those in our community. Tonight, we are thrilled to have Blair Bosley with us today. Thank you, Blair. Blair is an XR specialist, a museum educator, and a creative. Blair is currently a PhD student at the Georgia Institute of Technology in the digital media department, where her research on interactive storytelling, building immersive experiences like the one she's going to be showing us tonight, VR, AR, and XR, digital humanities, history, and activism. Blair, we are so thankful that you took some time away from your busy schedule to work with us tonight. I will go ahead and let you take over. Everyone, if you have any questions throughout, let me know. I will be monitoring the chat. Thank you, Blair.
Thank you. So I'm going to assume everyone can hear me. And so I'll take the time right now to kind of give an itinerary of like what we're going to be covering tonight. Just because of the time restraints we have, we won't technically go over everything that there is to do with Blender to like create a haunted house. But we will try to go over as much as we can in the basics primarily. In regards to our agenda, I'll spend time talking about Blender before going into like what Blender actually is structured like. So like if you aren't familiar with Blender, just going over like the tools and how to access them. And then from there, we'll go into actually modeling using Blender. Sorry for the background noise. I think it will end. Okay, sorry about that. We'll go over modeling structures in Blender. So specifically modeling the haunted house, and then we'll look at some tips and tricks, and so that's kind of within that. And then at the end, we'll go over textures, and if we have time, we'll talk about things like skyboxes and adding sound and like making a more immersive experience. So that being said, I will start off by talking a little bit about Blender. So I'm going to share my screen. For this evening, every single tool I'm going to share with you all is free to use. And so I'll probably use a lot of different textures and like show you where I get my sound files. And so everything, again, that I'm going to share with you is something that you can easily find for yourself. And there's all like from free websites. So if you're not familiar with Blender, it's a free software, open source that I just found out they're created in like 2002. So they have 20 years, or they've just celebrated 20 years on their website. But with this software, you can do a wide range of different things, from 3D to 2D animations and 3D modeling, which we'll be looking at today. They have tools that allow you to sculpt. If you're really interested in like special effects, or even I have some students I've taught in the past who are really interested in interior design, there's like space for you to do that in Blender. So it's really just like a wide range of different applications that can be created, or Blender offers a wide range of applications. So it has a variety of different uses. And again, it's free to use. So you can download it on your computers. I don't think it has like a mobile, you can't download it on a mobile device, but again, it's still like free to use. And that's mainly because of how like, in a sense, powerful you can create things, or how powerful the things that you create with it can be. So for example, you can't just, today we'll be only focusing on one model, but you can even go from modeling a neighborhood to a city to a town on Blender. So again, there's just like a lot of stuff that you can do, and sometimes that capability is not really supported on a mobile device or a tablet. So that's just a little bit about Blender. I'll go over what Blender actually looks like right now. So I'm going to switch screens real quick. So if you haven't downloaded Blender, I tried to download the newest version. I try to keep up to date, just so that my screen will look a little bit like yours. But once you get to Blender, it allows you to change which language preference you have. So if, again, English, I haven't said this, but if English is not your first language, or it's not language that you're really comfortable working with, then they have a variety of languages that are supported. Again, it's not all of the languages, so you can see that some are still in progress of being supported. And some are completed so that you can actually use those. There are some shortcuts in Blender. So if you are new to Blender, I would just stick with what Blender has. So they're usually documented. If you have like used Maya or any other like 3D modeling software, then or even like visual effects software or something like that, then you might want to switch to industry compatible, so something that's being used within the industry. You can choose which side of your mouse you're selecting with. So just so you know, my setup, I am using a wireless 3-button mouse, so nothing like super fancy. I could also use my trackpad, but I have some difficulty like navigating my screen with it. And then also like if you're doing animation, you can choose which tool allows you to play or what pops up when you click your space bar. And then you can also choose your theme. Right now I'm using Blender Dark, but again, if you want a different theme or a different like color scheme for your Blender window, you can choose that as well. So I'm just gonna stick with, I'm gonna select next. So this is what you should get when you first download Blender. So that one screen, this is the screen that pops up every time you open Blender. Basically, it allows you to kind of decide what, like instantly what kind of project you're going into. We'll be using General. And General basically has almost all of the different settings for like 2D animation all the way to video editing. That's already like set up. If you were to just do 2D animation, then you would probably click that, or sculpting. So it by clicking one of those, and I'll just show you real quick, it basically changes the layout of your screen and what you have access to. So again, we'll only be using, so I'm going to do File, New, General. So we'll be using our general screen again. If we wanted to do some sculpting, we could click that. So that's one of the cool things about Blender. If you do general, you have access to like almost every single tool that you would have like singular access to. I say singular if you like click a single project or project setup window. Because I'm going to be moving around Blender a little bit, and I want you to know what I'm actually clicking. Something I set up that I'm also going to see if it works. I might have not set it up again, which is going to be horrible if I didn't. Yeah, I don't think I did. I don't think I did. Oh no. Okay, so that's on me. I thought I had it already set up. Okay, so basically it was going to be a tool that allows you to see my the clicks on my screen, so what I'm actually clicking on and what buttons I'm clicking. But since we can't actually see that, it's totally fine. I won't worry about that. I'll just like talk to you about what buttons I'm clicking on my keyboard. So at the top of our screen, from just kind of give you an overview, we have basically some settings for actual like Blender structure and window. And so that goes from the Blender icon all the way to the help button. So again, help will allow you to get access to tutorials and other like communities, as well as like information about the system. So that's always really helpful to have. Window allows us to change or adapt our window. Render is really helpful if we're going to render out an image or an animation. So we'll probably look at that at the end. We have our edit tools to edit our actual actions, as well as like, as you can see, our menu setup. We might be looking at preferences a little bit later. And then we have our file tools, which basically allows us to access, import, export, modify, work with any files. We have a whole bunch of tools or other tabs that basically go to different screen layouts. We're going to stick with layout, the main one. But we might also look at some other ones, specifically the editing as we go forward. And then as you can see under that, so I'm going to go from that under here. And then I'll talk about the main screen, but under here you have basically a tab or a drop-down menu that allows you to basically decide what you're going to be seeing on your screen. So you can choose like from a 3D import or viewport all the way to like a spreadsheet if you wanted to. This one is our 3D viewport, so we'll stick with that. We have our object mode, and so we can go from object mode all the way to texture paint. I'll talk about the differences between all of those and what you can do with them as we go forward. We have some other tools where we can view, select, add objects, add, and then also look at objects and modify objects. We have a global or transform view, so we can kind of choose our transform orientations if we wanted to. I usually keep those the same, so I don't really mess with those. We're not going to mess with all of it, so I'll probably skip over things that we're not going to necessarily use, so we won't use that. And this is just because, as you can see, there's a lot happening with Blender, and so of course it's great to know every tool, but since we're not going to use certain tools, it might not be the best to go through everything. So what I will show is at the far like right-hand side of our screen above this tool or navigation tool right here. There are four little circles at the top. And there's like a little drop down where you can see, if you clicked it, you could see the materials. These four circles are super helpful because they allow us to basically adapt what's on our screen. So you can go from a viewport where it's basically just seeing the edges and wires of an object to shading, which we were seeing. And then we'll look over material preview mode a little bit later. We don't have a material, so it's not going to really show anything. And then we'll also talk about a render preview, and we'll do that again later. Both of those allow us to see materials that we add to our object, as well as our models, and as well as what the background looks like. So when if we add a sky box, which is basically wrapping environment around our scene, we could basically see the sky. If we add grass, you can see the grass, right? So there's just a lot we could do with this render preview, but it also is like what we would print out from Blender. So if you think of taking a snapshot or a picture as a render, then you have the ability to basically take a snapshot and print it out, or like save a snapshot or a picture of what you create onto your laptop. So look at that. One other tool that we will be using a lot of is this like pass-through tool. It's also called X-ray tool. Basically, it allows us to select one face, and when we select a face, and you can't really see it when selecting this cube because we're in object mode, but if it was see-through and we're making like a huge structure, instead of having to select every single face, and we'll talk about the difference between edges, faces, and like points or vertices soon. But if I wanted to select this like edge, and I also wanted to select this one or all of them, then having this tool on allows us to basically click one side and it selects everything for us. So this one is really helpful, and I'll show you like why as we progress. If you're having trouble getting or moving around the screen, one thing I'm going to let you know is that I have my middle button on my mouse. When I click that, that allows me to basically rotate around the screen. I'm using the middle button to roll closer to the object and roll away from the object. It's also some stuff you can do with the gizmo on the side, so I'll try to also use that more. And the hand tool as well will allow us to change our preview, so I might use that as well. So just clicking it and moving it allows us to kind of change our preview. We can also change our orientation, which might be helpful at some point, so we can change from a perspective to an orthographic view. And so that will be useful as we start to model out an object. You'll notice in our scene when we get started, so I'll just skip over these tools and these tools because we're going to get started now. But you'll notice when we get started, there are two things on our screen. One is a light, so that's kind of what is pointed, this like orange thing at the top that has the little circle in the middle and the little dashes around it. That's our light. And then next to that is our camera. We do not need either one of those just yet, but just to give you a little idea of what those are before. As I mentioned previously, when you're using Blender, you can also do 3D animation, 2D animation, and light sources are really important when doing the animation or even video effects, as well as like many other things. And so in order to actually have a light source or emulate a light source, Blender has like already programmed light sources that you can use. And then when you're trying to take a snapshot or record an animation, you'll need a camera. And again, Blender already has a camera. If you want to see what the camera view looks like, right under the hand tool is a camera view. And that's what you can see, or how you can see the cameras in action. There are two ways that we can delete things. And so I'm using these as an example of deleting. The first thing we can do is click X on our keyboard, or you can click something, right click, and then go to delete. I don't know if you all can see my right clicks. That might be a problem if you can't see the pop-up menu that appears. So what I am going to do is I will try to share my entire screen. Let's do a share like that. Cool. I don't think anything should be in your way to see my screen, but if there is, feel free to let me know in the chat and I can also look at it. Okay, cool. So again, there are a couple of ways of deleting things. So one way is by right-clicking and just clicking the delete button. So right-click and click delete. Another way is by clicking X on your keyboard. If you tried clicking and pressing the delete button, it does not work. So again, if I click this and I was like, I'm going to click the delete on my keyboard, oh, it worked. Okay, sometimes it doesn't work, where it's almost like the delete button is obsolete or doesn't work on your computer. And so if you're, for example, I previously have used a Mac where the X doesn't work. I also just update it. So maybe it's the newest update. It works. But if it doesn't work for you and you're trying to click the delete button and it just is not disappearing or deleting, then you can always click X on your keyboard, and that is a shortcut for deleting. So again, X, first you have to select, and then you click X, and then you can click delete. If we wanted to delete everything on our screen, A allows us to select all. So again, if you wanted to select all, there again are two ways of doing it. You can either click out away from your screen and then click and drag over everything you want to delete or everything you want to select. So again, click drag, or you can just click A on your keyboard. A will also deselect. So if I click A and I'm selecting all, I can click A and I can delete, deselect. Okay. So those are 3 ways to select all, or 2 ways to select all, and I think I also showed at least 2 or 3 ways to click delete. Another way, and the way that we'll also be like using for other things, is by actually going to the right-hand side of our screen. So I'm going to make my screen a little bit smaller, my project or 3D viewport a little bit smaller so we can see our scene collection. Our scene collection basically tells us every single object that's in our scene. So in this open 3D viewport. So right now we have a camera. If we select it, the camera shows up. We have a cube. If we select it, our cube shows up. And we have a light source. So we selected our cube, our light source is highlighted as well. What I'm going to do, so if you deleted it already, these are totally fine. I can delete this light source. But I also wanted to show you another thing that you can do. So if you are using an object, and maybe we might also use this a little bit later, there's just too much happening on our screen. So if we're making a 3D model of our haunted house and it's just like a lot happening, we can also hide certain aspects of our screen by clicking the eyeball. The eyeball is just like closing the eye. And so now if we were to select anything on our screen, the only thing you would see is the cube, because the camera is hidden now. If I click the camera or I click the nothing is on our screen because they are both hidden from view. If you are familiar with like layers or putting things on different or separate layers or separate, some people might even call them sheets, or even like hierarchies, scene collection is a way to do that. And so we'll be using a lot of like different layers for each of our different like parts of the house. And that's also because of the fact that when we add textures, we don't want to texture one whole object the same thing, right? So if we're trying to texture, let's say, well, in general, a house, right? You don't want everything to be bricks because that's not really how houses are structured are actually built in real life. Although, like, I mean, you have freedom of like creativity, so you can definitely do that. But what we'll be doing is basically separating those pieces so we have like different components that correlate to different parts of a structure. Cool. So to get started, I am going to delete the cube, I think. Cool. You also see that there's like this little, I'm always forgetting cursor. There we go. Cursor in the center of our screen. That's basically showing our origin. If you are not familiar with origins, you should know that there are three-dimensional spaces or planes. You can kind of think of our X and Y as like a straight or a flat graph space. And then what happens is when you add our Z kind of plane, that kind of breaks it up. And so Z goes like up and down, right? So left, right, front, back, up, down, right? That's kind of how I think of it. And that's our three like intersecting planes. So what happens is that the cursor is automatically set to the center of our space. What will happen, because the cursor is set in the middle and I'm not going to change it, you can change it yourself just by clicking the cursor button and then selecting another space. But everything that we add to our screen is going to automatically be set in the center of our screen, which oftentimes is really helpful and works really well. Okay, so that's really all I wanted to share about the setup of the screen. One thing I'm about to do is I'm going to go in the chat and I'm going to share the reference images I'm using. So one thing about modeling in Blender is that, and modeling in general, is sometimes it's really hard to just like go and create a 3D model of something. And so what I like to do is add reference images that I can use as basically giving me an idea of what I'm going to model. So what I've done already is I have found reference images for 2 different structures based on like what haunted houses are traditionally like. So, I mean, if we think of a haunted house, that is always correlated to the stories that come from a house. But usually when we actually see haunted houses, they all are from like Victorian style, so like 18th or 19th century homes that have like some eerie vibe and history to it. So I have found a box home, so basically homes that were created more in like colonial times, if we think of like a simplistic home. And then I've also found some images of a Victorian house. Now you can also find your own house or your own pictures if you'd like and use those. So for example, if you were like really interested in making your haunted house based on your own home or your own house, like you could definitely do that and just use images of your house. But I'm gonna just probably use the Victorian house to get started with.
Hey Blair, I think those images may have just gone to panelists instead of to all participants.
Okay. You know what? Thank you. I didn't actually read what you said. I thought you said it went to everyone and then completely blanked. Okay, so I'll send those again.
Thank you.
No, thank you. So those are the box home, and then I have a front and side view of a Victorian house. Now you'll notice that both the images don't match up, mainly because I couldn't really find a house that had, or I didn't really spend a lot of time looking, but I couldn't find a lot of houses that fit what I was probably trying to model, and also had a front picture taken and a back picture taken without any objects in the way. And so these were the clearest objects or clearest photos I could find that gave us a front view, back view, or side view, and also didn't have like a lot of like trees or shrubbery or just like beautiful landscaping. And they also like were super easy to kind of look at and kind of tell what's happening in the photos. So with that being said, you all should have those. Again, if you want to use your own images, go for it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to probably use the Victorian house. I have already created like a simple model from the box house, and I'm thinking because we might not have time to like do the entire Victorian house, what will happen is that I will probably switch to the box house to do our texturing. So you'll see like how to create a 3D model from like a structure, or 3D model based on a structure that doesn't have like very simple shapes. So for example, the box house is really just like a square with a triangle. Whereas like a Victorian house, you have like a lot of curves, you have like a lot of cylinders. So there's just like a lot more shapes that are a part of that structure. Okay, so that being said, I'm going to start by adding in a reference image. So one thing I want to note is that right now I'm in object mode. And you can see if I click that, I can't move anywhere else. And we'll talk a little bit about the differences between object mode and the other modes that we'll be using. But in object mode, I'm going to go to add, which is between select and object. I'm going to say add image. So I'm going to scroll all the way, or if you just click it, it should open up, and I'm going to move my mouse all the way down to image, and then I'll do reference images. You want to make sure you click reference image and not a background image. Background images are mainly used for like 2D. 2D models is what I usually use them for. So like if I'm making a animation in 2D and it's like a story about a dog going home, right? I don't know. Then my background image might be that house. I just find that adding a reference image allows you to actually manipulate the image a little bit more than a background image, and you can also set it up the way you like. So excuse me as I search for stuff. Okay, so I'm going to do the Victorian house front. I'm going to load reference images, and you'll see it's really small, but it shows up at the origin. And so that's the front. You also notice it's like slanted, so we want to fix that. I'm going to go on my X. So I'm going to just click the gizmo. So I am looking at so I'm like aligned with our X. Sorry, I'm just saying X, and I'm like, that's not what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I'll just stop there. But I'm aligned with our, like if we think of a graph, I'm aligned with the X coordinate. Okay. And so what I'm going to do right here while I'm aligned with the X coordinate is I'm going to, again, still in object mode, I'm going to go down from our select tool, which is this top one. Under that is cursor. Then we have our move tool, which will allow us to move. And so we'll do that a little bit later. We can rotate, we can scale it up so we can make it larger or smaller, and then we can do them all at once. And then the bottom ones are annotations, measuring, and then adding a cube. Right now, I'm going to just click rotate because I want to rotate the image so that it is straight. There we go, or as straight as it can be. It's a little tilted. Oh, okay, that's it. The next thing I want to do, so I'm going to go back to our Y view, and again, I'm going to make sure. So one thing I want to note is I'm making sure that Y is in the positive because that's going to be the front. If our Y is negative and our X is negative, that means we're kind of like in the back of our model. And I mean, it doesn't really matter because you can always just like move and orient yourself and move around, but this is what I'm going to do for this specific project. Okay. So what you'll notice is that the center of our screen kind of intersects at the bottom of the picture. I don't want that to happen. So I am going to orient my reference images so that it looks as if this like the origin is at the far left-hand corner, like the bottom left-hand corner of the image, right? So not like this left-hand corner, sorry, of the object I'm trying to model is what I meant, not the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the image up and to the side until the cursor is like intersecting at the bottom left-hand corner of that image, right? Or object that we're trying to model. So I want it to be at the edge of my structure. The reason I'm doing that is because I want to be able to model it where I have an idea of what the ground is. So again, we're in a 3D space, there's not really a ground. So in order to make or kind of emulate a ground, I have to kind of imagine one. And so what I'm doing is I'm going to assume that it's at the bottom of the object and that intersects with the origin. So after anything under the origin is underground, basically. Cool. So after doing that reference image, now we're going to add in our next reference image, which is the side view. The side view is a little bit different. Again, it shows up at the origin. And so the house you can see is a little bit different. The balcony and the tower is a little bit different here, but that's totally fine. What I'm doing or using the side view for is to give me an idea of like how far back the house should be, and then any other like characteristics that I might want to carry over. So it doesn't have to be perfect, or it doesn't have to be the same. Some people, when you're modeling something that you need to be precise, so for example, if we're modeling furniture, then we'd probably want a front and a back reference image that are the same. But if we're like kind of making something up, so like, again, this is like very fictional kind of structure, then we don't want them, or they don't necessarily have to be the same. We just need to have an idea of what we want it to look like. So for this reference image, I'm actually going to have them intersect. So I want the front of my structure to be something that I can see when I'm standing in the front. And then I want my side view to be something I see when I am looking at the X, or aligned with this like X coordinate right here. So I want to be able to see this image right here. And so what I will need to do for that is, the first thing I need to do is actually, I'm going to get to the top of this images, or these two images. Great. So I always rotate it so that it's a little bit easier to see, but I wanted to like rotate it so it's straight like that, or so as straight as possible. And then I'm going to rotate it to the right. And it's like 190. Ooh. Okay, something happened to my screen. I don't know if you all saw that. Okay. When I get to the bottom, I can kind of move around. And I mean, it doesn't have to be straight per se, but we want it to be easy to access, or easy to kind of see. Cool. That's that, I think. Cool. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it back so that they're intersecting. You'll notice also that one of the images is bigger than the other one. And again, I want to also make sure it's on the origin, or as close to the origin as possible. Okay. And sorry, I meant like the bottom of the image as close to the origin as possible. For this side of my picture, instead of like setting it up at the cursor, which we can actually do, we can do that. I'm going to move it back a little bit. And this is mainly so that I can kind of see how both of the images are a little bit different. The last thing that I'm doing, just so that you know how to use it, is I'm going to scale the images up. So scaling really just means making them a little bit larger. I'm going to scale this one up. I'm also going to scale this one up. So I might actually need to change them a little bit and move them. Cool. So I'm going to move this one. Again, I want it to kind of touch the base of my structure. That works. And then if I were to go on this side, this is still a little bit too high. I think this is it. Yeah, that works for me. Great. You can keep on like messing with them if that doesn't look like right to you. But I think for this project, and also because of the time that we have, I'm not going to mess with them as much. Okay, great. So it doesn't really matter where you start off. We can kind of decide which part of the project we want to work on first. But what I have been taught is to always look for our simple shapes. And so by simple shapes, it's shapes that you're easily able to identify. So from looking at the structure, I know that I can kind of intersect these objects and think of them as like three separate parts of a house. This is a little bit different. So this is like a window. So I'm not really counting this right yet. But these are three separate parts of a house. So we have the side, which is like a cylinder. So the left side is a cylinder, the right side is similar to a cylinder, but I think there's like less It's not as like circular, so there's a lot more, I'm gonna call it geometry, but it's more of like a lot more faces. And we'll talk again about faces. And then the center looks like a rectangle. So what I'm gonna start off with is a cube or a rectangle. So I'm gonna say add mesh cube. And you'll see here we have, in regards to our, I forgot to mention that, sorry. But in regards to the shapes that we can use, if we click add, that's all the 3D objects that we have access to editing. We can also use curves. There's surfaces or like surface curves or surface objects. We have meta balls, which basically give you a more like rounded object. Basically, it shows you how two objects intersecting can, like, in a sense, give you the object you want. Sorry, I meant to click X and delete. We have, of course, text, volume, grease pencils, armatures if you're doing anything with like 2D or sorry, 3D modeling, or even like adding rigs or characters. I say rigs, we can call them skeletons to anything. I'm specifically going to focus on meshes, and I'm going to use a cube for it right now. I forgot it's still in like the pass-through mode or transparent mode, so I'm going to turn that off right now. So again, it was on transparent, I turned it off. And the cube is like super large, and I just moved it to the middle of my screen. So now that we have the cube, you'll notice that our objects window also changes if you select it. So when we add a 3D object that we can edit, we get different tools that we can use for that object. So we have edit mode, which is what we'll be using. We can sculpt it using sculpt mode. So if you're really into sculpting out models, I feel like in the past I've only seen it used or used it myself on like 3D models of like humanoid, so things that are supposed to be humans and like animals. But if you're really into sculpting, you could definitely use that. Vertex paint, weight paint, and texture paint are all about like adding in texture or like making our model go from something that's like a grayish tone like it is now to like something that has texture that you can kind of easily identify. So that's like adding color or making, so for example, even like looking at the roof, like adding in like tiling or even painting it, right? So again, I'm going to edit mode. You'll notice that you can't change modes when you select a picture, mainly because the picture isn't a 3D object, so you can't edit it. Also, when you go to edit mode, the object that you can manipulate is the object you selected. So if we had 3 cubes and I only selected 1 cube and I clicked edit mode, then I'm only able to edit or change 1 of the cubes. But if I have 3 cubes on my screen and I select all 3 and I click to edit mode or went to edit mode, then I have the opportunity to edit every single object. So all 3 of those cubes. I can show you how that looks a little bit later as well. Okay. Sorry, I'm like looking at the time and making sure I don't go over. The last thing I wanted to point out is the fact that you'll notice right now, if we wanted to select our cube, we can only select the little points at the side or our vertices. So our vertices are basically the connection points between 2 edges, and they make up two edges, and all the edges together make up a face. So what we can do in Blender is we can select what we want to what we want to adapt or change. And so I usually stick with edges, which are these like lines between 2 vertices or vertexes, and faces, which again is like the whole face that makes up it's what's made up when you combine all of the edges and vertices and like the space that they cover, right? So for this project, I am only going to really be, well, I'll probably move around between vertices and edges. But one thing you should know is that when you always go to edit mode, sometimes it by default changes to you looking at a vertice. So if you don't want to manipulate your vertices all the time, then just make sure you're always selecting either edge or face. I noticed that there's a question. Oh my goodness. Great question. Yeah, so Boolean objects, I literally just wrote how to do it on my notes because I was also going to show that, is something that takes place in when we're selecting an object. So for those who are not familiar with what so someone asked in the chat about joining objects and Boolean objects. So for example, if we're trying to create a, let's see, maybe this like porch, right? Where it kind of looks like it's I think I can add a mesh here. It looks like a cylinder, but it's almost like a cutout cylinder, right? So we're not going to necessarily have every single, so we want to cut out these like openings here. Or we want to maybe even like interlock or intersect some of these spaces, or even join like the two shapes together. There are a couple of ways of doing that. So for example, to join them, I'm gonna just connect them real quick. You just want to select everything. This is where this tool becomes useful. Sorry, I'm gonna scroll. So I'm just scrolling using my middle mouse on this top so I can move over because I can't see everything. I'm doing the see-through or X-ray view just because I want to make sure I select everything. If I didn't have that selected, then I could have missed like the inside face, or even if we're looking at this cylinder, some of its faces as well. So when we think of joining things together, it's really just selecting two things, right-clicking, maybe I think it's an object mode, so not this mode. Right-clicking, and then where's the join button? Oh, always losing it. Okay. Well, I'll find the join button in a second. Just gotta remember where it's at, and maybe turn off that X-ray for transparent. Okay. But for like a join, oh, maybe it's already joined. Yeah. Okay, we joined it in edit mode for some reason because I guess they were connected there. But to join, you basically have two objects together and you join them. And then when you want to do a Boolean, or what I'm assuming you're asking, Boolean, at least like from my understanding, allows you to basically create a cutout of one object from another. So for example, you can imagine like cutting out a cookie, right? You want to cut out a shape, one cookie go, that's like a Boolean. And again, clarify if that's the wrong way of me thinking about it, because that's how I've been seeing it used in the context or in the past. So the way that you do it is modifier properties. So with modifier properties, you would basically choose, you can add a modifier, and one of the modifiers should be Boolean modifier. Yep, there we go. Boolean is right under generate. Again, Boolean allows you to cut out what is called the difference. So you can cut out one object from the other. So we selected the object. Again, one thing that I think is wrong is that not scope mode. I'm gonna be in edit mode real quick. I'm gonna click this tool again. I always forget which mode. I think it's edit mode, selecting both. But you have to select both. And I think that what you do is you can kind of choose the objects. Oh, why is it not like, I feel like I might actually need to go into another mode and delete one. So what I'm going to do is, okay. Yeah, everything's in the cube now. That's bad on my part. So my apologies. I'm going to click. I'm going to move this whole cube out. There we go. Click X. X, delete R. I'm going to dissolve all the faces, edges, and vertices is how you would do that. By clicking vertices, it should delete everything. I know sometimes it doesn't, And then that's what we're left with, like an edge. And it's not selecting it, which is disappointing. So what mode are we in? I think we're still in edit mode. I'm gonna go to object mode now, and then I'm gonna add another mesh that is the cylinder. There we go. And I realized I selected the wrong view. Okay, now, again, if we join these two, and they're two separate objects, which is what we wanted, I'm gonna go to turn this off. We're gonna click this, right click, parent. Let's just parent both objects right now. But if I wanted to make a Boolean, you just click that. Then you need to select the object or the collection, right? So we could use our own collection. Okay, that's the problem. And then we need to probably delete all of our non-mesh objects. So that's one thing about that, my bad. So you select the collection or the object, and then from that, so there we go, cube, we can do an extract, and so it should extract the difference. And so now what you see is, I think I did it differently where I made the cylinder the parent, and that was the problem. So it's like a parent-child relationship, whichever is the parent or the child. Sorry, whatever is the parent, it gets cut from, or the child cuts the parent in a way. So if you think of a hierarchy, your parent is always going to be on top, and so the child is under that. So you can see the cylinder is like the parent of the cube. All right, so now if we went to edit mode, oh, it wasn't showing. Okay. Basically, you just click these two. And again, I'm only able to select one. And then you can extract a whole tolerance, right? And then to apply it, you do a Control A on your keyboard. So Control A, and that's how it would be done. So I know that I didn't actually do it, and I can definitely like cover it more when we get to like that part of the object. I realize I probably should maybe spend a little bit more time talking about how to actually model everything out first. But yeah, that's definitely like a good question, and it really, as you can see, I'm having some difficulties with like that part. There we go. I think it's just because my modifier is in a different place than it should be. But yeah, we can go over that a little bit later as well. So one thing I'm about to do is I'm going to move my oh, there we go. My bad. So what happened was the cube was still a parent of the cylinder. And when I moved it or unparented them, which is what I forgot to do, then it cut it out. Okay, so I will go over that in more detail a little bit later, maybe. I'm going to move it to the side so that when we do go over it, I can actually show examples using that. So again, we're just going to move it to the side. And we're going to edit this and modify our main structure. And then also let me know in the chat if that was what you meant. But we'll model this out and we'll get to a good stopping point, and then we'll talk a little bit about like making cutouts for our porches or whatever. And using the Boolean. Okay, so again, I'm in edit mode because I'm selecting the cube. I'm going to go back. I'm going to unselect everything. I'm just going to click sync collection now. Okay. I'm going to do add object, add a mesh, add a cube. I'm going to have my cube on the screen. So again, I'm going to get through this little tutorial maybe a little bit faster than I would just because I'm looking at the time now. I'm going to go to edit mode. And so now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to try and match. So let me move this forward. I'm going to try and match this cube to this middle house section. So I'm going to, looking at the Y, I can't actually see through anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one thing by making it see-through. So now, there we go. Okay. See-through X-ray view. Cool. So now I can see what the house looks like behind it. And also, if I wanted to change the view, I could see the model on the side, or the image on the side. So again, looking at the Y view, what you notice is the house is a tad bit too long. And again, there's two ways of doing it: scaling, so just by clicking the scale button, and scaling in. I'm gonna do some keyboard shortcuts. I'm gonna click A, and I'm gonna click S on my keyboard. S is a quick and easy way of saying scale. So it's a keyboard shortcut. And you'll notice when you click S, you can scale up, you can scale down. One cool thing about scale is that if we know which like X, Y, or Z coordinate we want to scale using, so for example, if I'm scaling up, I'm probably going to use Z. So I'm going to scale on the Z axis. So I'm scaling up or down on the Z axis. If I'm scaling front and back, I'm thinking of front and back, or we can use Y, and if I'm scaling left and right, we're going to be using X. So I'm going to scale left and right, so I just want to use X, and I want to make it a little bit smaller. So you'll notice that I am probably going to, I am moving away from the right-hand side or left-hand side of the screen, so I can't really tell if I'm matching it up properly or closely on that edge. So I'm going to probably like guesstimate a little bit right here. And then once I'm done scaling, I'll move it back to see if it matches. Again, I went a little bit too short or too long. So again, I'll scale it again, just a smidge. And again, I'm not going to make it necessarily perfect per se, because I know that some of it will be cut off when I start adding other parts of the structure. Okay, so with that, I think that it looks decent. That's totally fine. Thanks for asking that. I had like done it before, but you can see my memory of doing it as a little not there. So thanks for asking that question about it. And again, I'll cover it again at the end, because I know that I was like moving around a lot. So if you weren't able to catch how to do a Boolean or use a Boolean modifier, I'll cover that again. And the Boolean again is to like just do a cutout of an object. Okay, so with this, we have our cube. Again, we're just looking at simple shapes. If we wanted to match it up on the side, what we could do, so I'm going to go to the side. Sorry, I noticed those two were right there. So it's a little hard to see on the side with those. So I'll go back to my object mode real quick. And then I'm going to just take those and I'll move them back. Cool. And now I'm going to go back to edit mode. Oh, wait, let me not click that. I'm going to click this, and then I'll go to edit mode. Okay. So now if I look at our view, again, I'm going to also use the hand tool to move a little bit. You'll notice that I'm a little far back on this end, right? I can move it up further. So I'm just going to move it up to where I think is right. So that looks right. And then you'll see that the house goes a little bit longer on the back. So again, I'm using two reference images. I'm going to pull from some characteristics or trait of the structure that I like. I'll probably leave out some other structures that I don't necessarily want. So I'm going to do S, and I will do, again, if we're thinking about which coordinate or which coordinate we're going to be scaling on, I'm using Y, just make it a little bit longer. And then I'm going to make sure I'm looking at X, and then I'm going to, I'm further away than I thought. Scale again, so S, Y, move it a little bit. There we go. And so now when I move it, it still might feel, it's a little too long now. So again, I can scale it in a smidge, and I'll just call that perfect for me. Okay, so now we have the core or the middle part of our house. So with that, we can start to add some more structures of it. There's a couple of tools I actually wanted to show that might be really fun to use. So I guess I'll show them now. Yeah. Because I think we can actually make the house in like separate sections, but that might not be the best for what we're trying to do. I think one thing actually, I'm gonna cut this house in half. So I'll probably only do this middle section and the right section. And so I won't do what's on the left. Instead, what I'm gonna do is actually, I'm gonna grab this fireplace. So again, if we wanna think of the actual picture, I'm gonna just cut out this section. And so I'll only do what's right here and here. And then I'll just grab this fireplace. And the reason I'm grabbing the fireplace and doing that is because I think that the fireplace allows us to use a little bit more tools than we would use if we were copying this image exactly. Okay, so I'm going back to my cube here. I'm just clicking it. Again, since we're doing our transparent X-ray toggle view, by just clicking one edge of it, I'm clicking or selecting the entire object. Okay, when we select that, we can click our edit mode. In edit mode, again, I'm just going to click this or copy this fireplace. I'm going to make it a separate piece. So what I will do is actually, I'll go back to object edit mode, or sorry, object mode, and I'm going to add a new object. So I'm going to add a new cube, and it will appear, I'm going to make it this shape. So it's going to appear right here. The reason I'm doing this again is because I want you all to, or I want them to be separate so that if I were to texture one and not the other, or I had like a brick texture and then a wood texture for the house, I want them to look different. So they're going to be two separate objects. But to make sure that they are two separate objects, I'm going to hide the cube. So this main cube, I will also rename it here. So let's rename it. I'm just going to double click on the cube's name and I'll rename it front door, right? Or no, front house, front center maybe, because the front center of the house. Okay, naming conventions are always a little hard. And then this one is the fireplace, or one of like two fireplaces, but we'll only do one. Okay, so now that I know which part of the house is which, and again, I'm just double clicking and renaming, I'm going to hide what I don't want to see. So I don't need to see the front center of the house just yet. I'm going back to the fireplace. So again, I'm copying the fireplace because it's the side of the house and I want to keep that side so that now I could probably just focus more on the front if I finish the fireplace first. So I'm going to just do the fireplace real quick and then I'll skip back to the front of the house and finish that. If you'll notice for me, you can structure it where maybe you focus on all the front of the house and then you move to the side. That's what a lot of like designers do or modelers do. I am skipping around because I want us to get to using as many tools as possible. And so while I usually, if I'm like doing a 3D model, I stick to what the model should look like in the front, and then I move to like what the side view of the model is. For the sake of this like class, I'm just going to skip to the parts that use the most or the different types of tools that might be of interest to some folks. Okay, so again, I'm selecting the fireplace. I'm going to edit mode. It's also too far away and not at the right position, and it's also too big. So I'm going to move it up. That's the first thing I'm going to do to kind of match it with where the image starts. I'm only staying on this like Y view. So that's all I need to see. I'm also going to scale it. So I'm just shrinking it to make it smaller. And if you know we're scaling it, you can always check the coordinate and we're going to be using Y. So again, scaling is going to be S. We're changing it on the Y coordinate. So we're going to just click S and then Y. So we're clicking S first. And again, that allows us to scale everything. And we're clicking, not this X. So if you click the wrong one, so I just clicked X. So now you can see that's probably scaling differently. I'm going to click Y so that it scales in the way that I want. I'm going to make it really thin. That looks fine. I'm just going to set it there. And then I'm also going to make sure I can see through it. So I'll do a wireframe view. Cool. So now if we look, it's a really long, which is not what we want. So I'll probably scale it again, X, to make it smaller. And then if I go back to the front view, you'll also notice, the side view, you'll also notice that, I'm gonna move the hand tool, click X again, hand tool. Not only is it too wide, but it's also too long. So it goes from like looking like a rectangle to being pointed like a square. And then that square kind of evens itself out and it goes into a smaller rectangle shape. So in order to do that, I need to actually make my shape a little bit thinner and a little bit smaller. So I'm going to scale it again on the X. No, not the X, on the Y. Sorry, right there. Move it over a little bit more. And I'm going to scale it on the Z. So I'm clicking Z and I'm making it smaller. Okay. And I'm eyeing it, but if you kind of like set your, like if I set the object like right here to scale it, Z, then it would scale down and I kind of know where I'm going. Okay, so that looks fine. You'll also notice that this bottom has a different texture. We can just texture it later to make that kind of look or emulate the picture if we wanted to. So we don't have to actually have it where the fireplace starts up here, right? We can have it start at the bottom of the house. I just noticed I made it a little bit too short. I'm trying to model it after that. So I'm just going to scale it up a little bit more with the Z. Okay, cool. And I'll call that perfect for me. So I'm saying perfect for me because if yours, you want it to be a little bit more precise, that's totally fine. That's perfect for you. Cool, so now that I have that, what you'll notice is that I need to start tapering it in. So I need to taper the fireplace and go into this like point. And so I wanted to show the fireplace because it uses some of our tools that are only for edit mode. So I won't go through what all of these are, but I will show some. So I'm gonna mainly focus on extrude, region, bevel, maybe inset faces, and then we're gonna also talk about loop cut and maybe knife. But all of these basically are tools that we can use to edit our cubes and our objects. And I highly suggest playing around with them. Sadly, we won't have time this evening, but if you have time later on, I highly suggest doing it. Mainly what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to extrude. So I'm going to basically extrude is to like take a face, edge, line, however you want to think of it, or vertice, and move it up, down, right, left, basically any like way you want to. But it just kind of like add an extension to what we already have in regards to a shape. So I'll be extruding the fireplace up. And while extruding, I'm also going to try to scale in. So there's two things I'm trying to do at once. So to extrude, I need to actually select the face I'm extruding from. Extruding is really helpful when you're doing faces instead of like vertices or edges because they're just like super precise. And oftentimes if you're like extruding a vertice or an edge, if you like move the wrong way, then it'll cause like your structure to look a little off or be too pointed. I mean, it works if you're trying to make like something that has like a pointed edge. So for example, we could extrude an edge for our roof, but for what we're doing right now, we don't want to select our edges or vertices. So we only want to select the face. So what I'm going to do real quick before I move forward is I'm going to click X so that I'm looking at my object straight on. If I'm looking at the side, what will happen is when I start to extrude, I won't really be able to like measure or match up the reference images to my 3D model. So I'm going to select that, and then I will select the extrude button. So again, extrude is or I didn't actually tell you what extrude button is, but extrude is the regular cube with a green cube coming from it. So again, extruding allows us to extrude through any of the axes. So again, how I said I will do it is I'm going to extrude up, but I'm also going to click scale at the same time or scale after I extrude. So I'm going to say Control-C to undo it. I'm going to extrude up a little bit at a time. So once I get here, like a point past where it starts to narrow, I'm going to click scale and I'm going to just scale in. So you'll notice, I think we can get closer. Let's get closer, and I'm going to move this here. We've gotten, we moved in a little bit. So again, I'm going to extrude up. So I'm extruding, which is adding new faces, but I'm also scaling in to basically kind of taper off my object. One thing I'll note is, as you can see, it's starting to look somewhat round, but it's also like basically looking as if I kind of am doing what I'm doing, which is basically extruding and then like scaling in. So it's not as like straight if we think of like wanting it to be smooth, but it's not as smooth as we want. And the way that you could make it smoother is by adding more edges. So if we think of how circles are made in 3D spaces like Blender, a circle is just a whole bunch of like, or a cube that has a lot of edges is how I think of it. And I'll show you what I mean after finishing this. So to make it smoother, we can add more edges. But for what I'm doing now, I'm just going to extrude and keep it like it is. So I'm going to extrude up again, a little bit past where I want to go, but not too far. I'll click scale to scale it in. And then I think this might be good enough to extrude all the way up. Not all that far. So let me exit or undo. I'm going to extrude up, and that's that. And that is the end of that shape. And so now we have our fireplace done. I extruded up to the end or the edge of this reference image, and that's that. Again, one thing I want to show is the circle that I was talking about. So again, if we turn on our model so you can see the circle, and I'm going to also move this out. Oh, sorry, I meant to add not a circle, but a UV sphere. So again, the smoother it is, it's just because we have a lot of edges and like vertices. And even then we can make it smoother by adding a little bit more, like I'm gonna call it geometry. So all of these faces basically add to the geometry of the shape. But to make it smoother, we'd add more geometry to that shape. So I'm gonna select this so I can kind of select all of it. Hold Shift as well while doing this, only because I want to delete this. And that's that. Okay, I'm gonna click X, delete all vertices. Okay, and of course, always mix one. And that's mainly because I cannot select edges. X, delete edges. Okay, I'll just have that stay because it's not really working right now. It's disappointing because I put them all in the same object. Okay, so we have our fireplace. Again, if we wanted to add more edges to make it a little bit smooth, we could. One way we could do that, again, I'm going to go back to faces, is by doing something called, or one way I didn't mention that we could do it is by actually adding loop cuts. Loop cuts just basically allow us to cut or add more faces to our edges or to our mesh. So if I wanted to, I could add more edges, and then those edges I could scale in, and it would like soften that transition for me of the fireplace from going to like a rectangle all the way to like a smaller rectangle, but it just softens the curve. So you can see it's like a little bit softer than like right here. And you can keep on doing it if you want. I'm just clicking and dragging. So once you let go, that's when the edge gets finalized. Clicking, dragging, and then I'm also like, some of the stuff doesn't really need like to be scaled. But I just wanted to show you loop cuts just in case you're interested in maybe adding a loop cut. And this is where maybe at the bottom, if we wanted to separate like the brick texture of our fireplace from like, if we're looking at this reference image from the like brick texture of our foundation, then you could add a loop cut. And that like loop cut could basically be where like the foundation's brick is at the bottom, and then this like red brick or whatever is at the top to like kind of match the reference image. So again, loop cuts are really helpful if you're adding more geometry, or even if you're trying to separate your two faces or separate a face. It's also what we might use for our door, and to also like emulate some windows, just because, again, we're trying to make a more dilapidated house if we think of a haunted house. So we're not necessarily going to have the most like put together house if we look at these images. Okay, so I finished the fireplace. I can copy this mesh and have multiple fireplaces if I wanted to. So I don't have to make numerous fireplaces. I just could copy this one and place it back here if I wanted to, if I need to have another fireplace. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to object mode again to like scroll past or to get to object mode. You can see I can only see part of it. I'm just going with my middle mouse. But in object mode, I could just go to my scene collection. I could right click on the fireplace and then I click copy and I could click place and now I have, or paste, and now I have 2 fireplaces. You could also do Control C, Control V. Now I have 3 fireplaces, and I could just move them one from another. And now I have multiple ones. And now I'm realizing I forgot to delete that circle right there. That is going to be bad. So let's go back to just one fireplace. I'm going to go back to edit mode real quick, just so I can delete this real quick. And I'm also selecting the selection tool. X, delete vertices, right? X, delete vertices. Okay, cool. Okay, so now I'm going back to object mode. We have our fireplace. If we go back to our cube, oh, not our cube, sorry, our front center. I'm gonna hide those 2 at the back so I don't see them. Cool. If we go back to the house, we have our front center. I can move this over a little bit. I also might notice that this and this are not like matching up the way that I want. So maybe I move this a little bit forward, and yeah, that looks nice. I'm connecting these 2, so I also could move this a little bit closer to the actual house, maybe like there. And I want them to kind of match, so I'm looking at the ground, and I want to make sure that one is not higher than the other. So there, and I'm going to get into a wide view to check. Okay, wide view, zoom out. Sorry, I'm going to just hide the reference images real quick. They show up as empty, so it works for me, but you can also name those as well. Unclick, but still too high. Just a smidge. We'll call that Eve. We'll call that perfect. Okay. Fair enough. Okay, that's better for me. Okay, so now I'm gonna add my reference images again. Again, I'm only focusing now on this part of the house. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select these 2 and I'm just gonna move them to the side so that it kind of matches the structure of the house. Uh-oh, there we go, the side. And now my focus is going to be on this tower, you can call it, or this porch. So you'll notice that it is a cylinder. Technically, if we think of the most simplest shapes, it's just a cylinder. But because we had someone who asked about booleans earlier, and also because we probably should do a little bit more talking about booleans, what I'll do is I will have it where it's like maybe two overlapping cylinders. I think that might be the best way of doing it. And so I'll talk through what I'm also going to do. Okay, maybe that's not straight. Cool. So the first thing I want to do is in object mode, I'm going to add a cylinder. So I'm going to do a mesh cylinder. My cylinder is going to be its own thing, so it doesn't need to be a part of anything else. We want it to be just there. The cylinder is like really large, but that's totally fine because we want a large cylinder, I think. I'm going to also make sure it starts at the origin. So I'm going to get on my X position. Is go up. That looks great. While I'm selecting the cylinder, I'm going to go to our edit mode. And I'm going to scale the cylinder down in general. So I'm scaling it down so it's the inner cylinder. And so now I'm realizing it's a little bit, there we go. So that's all, sorry, I clicked my keyboard, and then I made everything a wireframe. So I probably should have mentioned that. And again, to get to wireframes, I'm going to scroll at this top. I'm just going to select the wireframe button. So I'm selecting everything. I'm going to scale up on the Z-axis. So I'm scaling it to make it a little bit longer. I don't want it to be as long as a fireplace, so I'm going to scale it down a little bit, but I still want it to be tall. And then now, I'm also going to make sure I'm selecting faces. I'm going to match it a little bit with our other shape. I'm also going to move it forward. There. So because we're moving it forward, what I could do is add some stuff back here. Maybe I'll copy what's on this other reference image to have like a more larger house. But for right now, I will not. Okay, so that looks fine. Again, one thing I noticed that we'll do now in object mode is that there are these like cylinders that are around the object too. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to cut out a cylinder. And I'm only doing this because, I mean, you could also just, again, if we think of like a donut shape, a torus would actually give us that shape. So I might actually use that. To do, actually, it might be useful to have it right now and to just cut out a cylinder from the inside. So like, let's do that. Let's cut out a cylinder so it's not circular. So if I just did a cylinder here, I could kind of scale those in. Well, a cylinder is circular, but let's say we want to make it a little bit of an odd shape. So we want to cut out this bottom back part. The way that I would do it is by selecting them both. I'm going to join them. There we go. So if you click them both in object mode, the two that you want to join, the last one you select is going to be the parent. So I'm going to have the torus be the parent. So the circle be the parent, and I'm going to just click join. Once they're joined, basically they are the same shape. They're connected now. If we wanted to add a modifier to basically cut out one part of the other, so I want to cut the cylinder from the torus, so it's going to be like cut from it. I'm going to go back to Boolean. So again, I joined them in object mode by selecting them both and clicking the join after I right clicked. And so now to like cut out the difference, I'm going to go to difference. I'm going to say it's an object that I want to select, and I'm going to select that object. This is where it gets a little bit tricky because I know what object it isn't. So right now I'm looking for the torus. Or am I? I think I'm looking for the cylinder. So I'm looking for the object that I want to cut out. And why is this? Parent objects. I think that's a better way of thinking about it. Okay, yeah. So that's the I have to remember which cylinder is which. That cylinder one, so I don't want it to be that one. And then our regular cylinder was the one that was cut out, that's hidden. Okay, so I'm not looking at this cylinder. Uh-oh, I lost the torus. Excuse me while I delete this all. Okay, doing it again. I think I just did it wrong. So cylinder, I'm just going to choose two different shapes. But it would be helpful if we could do it where we can do it with a curve. And so that I think would be, is also like something. So if we have like a arched or curved doorway and having a curve cut out a piece, or like even if we look at this like window right here, having a curve cut out the cylinder on the side is probably like one aspect that we want it to do. or something we want it to do. So I could do is I could rotate this. Can make it smaller. Uh-oh. Control Z. That. I just want to scale this, not that, the torus. Scale. Rotate it. And then move it forward. So hopefully it'll give us like a window shape. Okay, now I'm gonna select them both, and instead of joining, I'm just gonna parent. There we go, parent object. Okay, the torus is now parent of, the parent of the cylinder, which is great. I select the torus. I'm gonna go to this like modifier properties. We're going to say Boolean difference. This is cylinder 0.0.2. If we scroll down, yep, right there. I'm gonna say it's exact. And then we have two things. We can do an intersection by itself. So the torus intersects itself in a sense, or a hole tolerant, which I believe is that it shows up as a hole. So we're gonna do hole tolerant because that's what I did before. And then to apply it, we're just gonna say Control A. And so basically what should happen is this is where the cutout should take place for the cylinder. And so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hide one. Uh-oh. I think I did it wrong. Or maybe they weren't like actually touching. I go to edit mode. I cannot tell. Might be because the view I have. Yeah, okay. So we probably should have intersected it more. But basically the whole process is like selecting it, adding it as a modifier, doing a Boolean of them both, right? So again, I'm not in the right mode. I can select them both. And then again, I don't know, I keep on going to edit mode, just selecting the cutout. Oh, there we go. And then extracting it. And since I'm selecting the torus, right, I'm going to do that one. But I don't think I don't know if this extraction is actually taking place, and it might just be because I am clicking the wrong thing. But yeah, sorry. I will try to find resources to go over that in more detail than I can, because I think I keep on clicking the wrong thing, which I'm really sorry about. Also, there should be like an apply button, so that's one of the other problems with what I think I'm seeing. But cool. Just delete this. So, yeah, I think I also parented them the wrong way. So delete. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I did it the wrong way. I should have had the cylinder as the parent of the torus. And then what happens is once you delete the cylinder, so again, to modify it, you just go in, object mode, Boolean difference, select the object that you are cutting from your parent, right? So it's going to be the cylinder is being cut from the torus, so the cylinder is cutting the torus. I did hole tolerant, and then I did Control A on my keyboard. And once I delete the cylinder, and again, deleting is a little weird because I'm doing the drop down, and I'm deleting this where it says cylinder 0.0.3, which is the actual object. It doesn't cut out. But I say that because I did the wrong thing. I should have made the cylinder the parent of the torus. So I can walk through that again. But I also just did a reference because I realize I am spending too much time on that. But basically, I could do that with the porch. I need to be mindful of the time because I wanted to go over texturing. Yeah, I might skip to texturing real quick. But basically to continue, I would probably, if I am going to continue with this, I would probably go and add in a different mesh, and it would be a cone. And I say cone because if I'm looking at this porch right here, I really just want it to kind of have that like cone shape at the bottom. So I don't necessarily want all of this. I just want the cone. And so, or the bottom half of the cone. And so the thing is, we could like make it, we could extrude, let's see if I can turn this off right. We could make loop cuts for our cylinder, and we could extrude those loop cuts. So I'll show you how I did that for the box house. But we could extrude loop cuts. So just to kind of show you what I'm thinking, we could do edit mode. We could create loop cuts. So right here, and then also one right here. And then we could go to our pass through. Like I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to click extrude. Actually, I'm going to click select. I'm going to select this middle right here. Uh-oh. It's still edges, so it should select all the edges right here. Oh, okay. This should be better. Right, and I could then click extrude. Then I could extrude out. Again, with extrude, you can also select which way you're extruding. So I'm not going to extrude up. I'm going to extrude down, but down on like the wrong one. There we go. Down on like the X. But I could extrude out, and I could make them like really precise, and I could do it that way. But I instead, because again, we're looking at the simplest shapes, the way I would do it is actually by doing an edge cut of my sorry, a loop cut. Am I clicking? Number of cuts. Okay, so a loop cut. Not on the edges, but the face. Actually, it's being weird. Okay. Oh, because I'm doing the entire thing. That's wild. Okay, loop cut. I'm going to go back to object mode. So I'm going to click that. Edit mode. Loop cut should now work if I am doing the right thing. I'm going to click A. It's just loop cutting the faces, which I realize is not what I want. So I think that might be a part of the shape, maybe. But basically, I would want to cut this in half by just having loop cuts, and then I would cut the top off and then use the bottom as my like umbrella. And I'm realizing I don't know why this mesh is not working the way I want it to. I don't know if it has something to do with the fact that it's making actually it does. It's just making every edge a point itself. So when we do loop cuts right here, it's just going to cut a shape or a cut from the edge. So it's not necessarily making or connecting them or connecting the dots and saying like, these are faces. So it's like a personal thing that I would probably have to go and fix myself. And you probably don't have this problem. Hopefully not. It's just probably like making an actual easy to cut edge for you. But yeah, I would just cut it in half. And this might be where I would probably use the Boolean difference, but cut it in half and then just use the half as that like this porch part right here. Again, I'm looking at the time, so I feel like I've been stuck on some things. So I'm gonna move forward and talk a little bit about texturing. If you have any questions though about like this process, feel free to drop them in the chat. But again, I'm just gonna open up the box house that I created. I'll save this as an untitled right now. So I'm gonna move to the box cut or the box house. So open reset box house. Okay. And so now the box house was made off of or based on this like structure. So let me hide the actual cube. It is one piece, so that's like the one problem. But again, it's following this two images that I shared. So the front of this house, the back of that house. And again, it's just using extrude. One thing that I did here was roof is that I extruded it, and then I also like scaled it down. I did a couple of loop cuts. So if we actually look at so I'm gonna click A. I'll go to edit mode and see there's a lot more loop cuts and geometry within the actual structure. So my hopes for right now is that I'm going to actually go and skip through the process or talk about the process of adding textures. This will be the last thing I talk about just for the sake of time, but I will be sharing resources that I think are really helpful going forward. Okay, so the first thing I would do if I'm adding in a texture is I'm going to get out of edit mode, I'm going to object mode. Again, since this is like one texture and I don't want to texture everything, I'm actually going to start at the fireplace. So the easiest way to add a texture is actually to add a material color. So if you are someone who just like doesn't have an idea of like what textures to use, but you just want to like add a color scheme to your material, then you can just select the object and go into our properties window at the bottom. So I'm going to make this a little bit larger for me to see. And then the top is like a materials property. I am selecting the picture, so I want to actually select out of that. Sorry, that's the world. I meant the one at the bottom, right? So this is our texture properties. So we're selecting our cube, and we went to the bottom to select our materials properties. Under should be texture, I think. If I am correct. Yep. So materials properties. When you select materials properties, you have the ability to add a different color, but also a different file that has a texture. So you can think of textures as like images that you can, I always think of them as images I can glue onto objects if we think of it like in a physical way. But one thing we can also do is add in our new color scheme. So if I wanted this to be like red, I'm creating a material called red, then basically I could add this color, or I could make this the color red. I might change the saturation to make it a darker red. Yeah, it's red now. What you'll notice is that even though I changed this to the color red, and the cube should be now the color red if I check, yeah, it doesn't show. And the reason it doesn't show is because right now we're looking at it as a mesh or a solid, like, yeah, basically a mesh view. And we want to look at it as a materials view. So at the top, again, if we look at the circles, we can skip from our shading viewport to our material viewport. When we click that, we can now see that it's red. Cool. So one thing we could also do is that if we wanted to get like really fancy, we could change like the roughness. So if we're thinking of like making it look like bricks or anything, we could like try to kind of change it so that it gets that view. We could also have it like a little bit more metallic, whatever we wanted to do basically. We could do here, right? Even like changing the surface view, we could change it so it looks glossy, or where is the one that I was going to look for or use? Don't see it. Well, let's just do glass. It could look like glass, right? So that's supposed to give it a glass-like view, which might be helpful if we're doing like mirrors. We could also give it a hair view or whatever. Basically anything really to like make it look like that. But what we want to do is actually make it a color, or sorry, a texture. So I'll change it back to, actually I'll just delete it. So to delete it, I'm going to just click it and I'm going to click the minus. So again, if we wanted to add a material, you just click the plus. But for me, since I don't want it to be a material, I want it to be a texture, I'm actually going to go to where it says base color. And instead of just clicking this area that allows me to change the color, I'm actually going to click the yellow circle that is right in front of it. And when I click that, I can, of course, change the texture to a brick texture if I wanted to. But I could also find an image that I have found on like the internet and use that instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to an image texture. And so an image texture makes the material like colorless, so it's black now. And that's basically because we haven't added in an image. So right now, these are the textures I have. I'm probably going to just use the wood because that's the one that I have access to right now. All of the textures I am using came from these websites. So textures.com, CG Trader, and ambient.com, which provides like free textures. Textures and like CG Trader require you to pay for textures, as you can see. So sometimes they're not the best for using if you're wanting to like use or create something that's completely free. But for this class, I was just like looking for a lot of different textures, and that was the only one that really allowed me to kind of find what I was looking for. Cool. Or those are the websites I was using to find what I was looking for. So to add a texture, I'm just going to click open. Open basically takes me to a window that basically to our upload window. I'm going to use one of the plywood textures I created or shared. And just like that, the texture, oh, that's the wrong one, isn't it? Uh-oh. To change it, I can just click that again. Maybe wood planks, yeah. So now I have this like wood plank texture on my material. Now, what I could do, and the last thing I'll show is like how to do a more UV texture mapping. So if you want it to like look a little bit more clean and precise, you actually have to unwrap the texture or unwrap the material or the object is what I mean. So basically unwrapping is almost like taking a pair of scissors and cutting the 3D model until it looks flat or until it can become a flat object. And that's kind of how you can map or match up like different seams or different parts of your object so that it looks precise. And so to do that, we're going to go to our edit mode, if I'm correct. And we are going to, sorry, I'm going to go back to object mode real quick. And I'm going to turn off these paintings or images in the background. Okay, we're going to click the right click the object, and go to edit mode. Okay, cool. So now what we can do is we can basically, I'm going to select my edges, but we could select specific parts of our edges. And basically we could mark it as a seam. So again, if we mark it as a seam, that is basically where we're cutting our edge at, or cutting our object. So I could basically mark all of these edges that I want to be different as a seam. And again, remember, we want to cut it so that it's flat. So mark seam. The bottom, if you, so my reference image for this is a little bit different. So the fireplace, this part of the fireplace is actually a different color. So I'm going to mark that seam. And then because, again, I just wanted to mark it all so that it can cut out and look a little bit flatter. I'm going to also mark the seam. Okay, there we go. I'm going to mark seam. And I'm going to mark seam. Now that I have marked the majority of the seams that I think I should cut, I can go back to, sorry, I'm going to go keep on edit mode. And I am going to, I'm actually just going to go to object mode real quick. And then I should be able to go from object mode, selecting the object, to UV editing. And now you'll see if I select that object, each of the faces that I cut appear on the texture that I added. And so now if I were to just do the faces, each face will individually appear. And I click A to select all, it all appears. And again, it's all cut in the way that I kind of mark the seam. Now, if I had like a triangle, so like one was a triangle and I cut it in half, it's like I added a loop cut here or edge cut here, which we can do, honestly. Let's try it out. And I went to mark this as a seam. So I'm going to just do my selector tool And I'm gonna click that and say mark scene. And now I select all. Again, all of that geometry appears. If I just select faces, those also appear. But for the most part, when I cut and I mark new edges, that's what's gonna be in my UV editing. And so what I could do now is I could go in and I could basically select certain faces and either move the material or move the faces so that they match what I want them to look like. So right here, if I go to this move tool and I select this face, I could kind of move it over. I could also select faces individually. So like, let's say I want to use this face and I just want to move it to over here, move here. Then I could again select another face. I'm gonna undo what I just did with this. Okay, I'm just gonna select faces individually, my bad. I'm trying to select the whole face. I'm selecting the middle after selecting the face tool. And basically I could just do this for every single piece of the house that I construct to kind of give each of them a similar or a separate texture. Now, that's basically the process of texturing. And so once you're done with that, let's say that I finished texturing that part of the structure, I can then test it out and see if it like looks right by turning on my texture wrapping. And you'll see that some of the seams don't match up anymore, right? So if I select this, maybe I want it to look a little bit different. Or maybe I just kind of want it to look older, like a more rustic building. I could also, or more dilapidated, if I want it to be a haunted house. I could rotate it, I could move it up. I could also scale it down so it's a little bit smaller and you can kind of see the grains. Or I could scale it up. So if I want like a whole wood piece on it, I could scale it up so that it actually has like a whole wood piece and you can kind of see that. Maybe the top of it, I want it to like be colorless since it's the inside of it. So I might scale this or move it up here or down to make it a little smaller. But yeah, so there's like a lot you can do with texturing it. So I'm gonna pause here. I realized that I probably spent a lot of time talking about Boolean modifiers. So my bad if we kind of cut out into or not being able to see certain aspects that folks are more interested in. But I do want to give room for folks if you have questions to ask them. Feel free to do so.
If anyone would like to be unmuted to ask their question out loud, just let me know and I can do that. If not, you're welcome to use the chat button or the Q&A function.
While we're waiting to see if folks have questions, I will share. I just need to find the resource. I will share one of my, I think, all-time favorite YouTubers. And I feel like everyone kind of knows like the donut tutorial that he created. But I was going to go to his website. Okay, cool. Just because I think his website provides a lot of different examples. Also, if you wanted to continue with this project, but you were like unsure of like which materials to use, he does have a how to make a abandoned house that might be helpful for some folks. But it's just blenderguru.com. When you click the images, they usually take you to his YouTube tutorials or a website that you can kind of look at that will provide a little bit more context to, or sorry, a separate page that provides a little bit more context to like what he's actually working on and like his tutorials. Okay, so I clicked the wrong thing, my bad. I meant to click this. That's one thing. I also think that Blender overall has like a very great, where are we? Blender overall has a great support in general. So if you even go to their support, you can see their user manual, other documentation. You can also look at some of their community groups that you can actually like access and like ask questions on those as well. And so it's like super supportive, and there's like, again, a lot of like YouTube tutorials in general that you can always have access if you have questions or fall into like trying to figure out something. Example, the other day I was working with some folks who were interested in like trying to make, sorry, I stopped screen sharing that, but who were trying to make a leaf that was also see-through, or part of the leaf was see-through. And so we were able to like find a Blender tutorial that allowed them to like basically map a texture just like this, but have it where certain colors of the texture, so almost like a green screen, but certain colors of the texture were see-through. And so, yeah, there's just like a lot of things you can do with Blender. So I would highly suggest, like, if you want to spend more time looking at other things, you can. Again, sorry we weren't able to cover making a whole haunted house in the time frame that we had, but I did want to start you off with just the basics so that you can kind of continue working on it yourself. I realize there's a question. I'm trying to make a roof from a tiled cube, but can't figure out how to cut away at it. Can I ask that to make a new shape? And then move the section. Yeah, so a tiled cube. So there are like a couple of ways that, that you could make a roof. Let's see, if I were to make a roof. So again, this roof I actually made from a cube, and it's just like one singular shape. But to make that, which I would do, I'm gonna add a mesh. I'm gonna add a cube. And then the easiest way to make a roof, if you're just making like a simple triangle, is to add a loop cut in the center, a loop cut in the center there. And then just to select the edge and go up, right? That is one way you can make a, let me go back to this. One way you could make a roof, right? And you're just going to go up. Uh-oh, I was looking at it the wrong way. All right, and again, we could probably fix the like loop cut so that it looks a little bit more precise. The way that I made this roof was that I made a loop cut at the back, I think, as well. One right here. And then I was moving the edges up. So here, moving the edge up. Oh, it's not connected. So I'm gonna just click shift, move it up a little bit and move it forward, because I'm also trying to keep it precise. I wasn't really worried about the geometry of the bottom. I mean, if you're gonna be like a little bit more precise than you can be. But that's how I would do with the tilted cube. Yeah, and then the thing is, like, you can continue. So like for this, since I wanted it to like be slanted, but I also wanted to kind of like have it where the slanting wasn't extreme in a sense. So you can kind of see here, there's like a dip, and then it like kind of smooths out. So I added like a little bit more geometry. So I added like a lot more of these loop cuts. And so by geometry, I always mean bases. But I added a little bit more loop cuts to make it a little bit more precise so that it didn't it smoothed out on its own. And then at least for this part of the roof, so if I kind of go back to object mode and I go to edit mode on this shape, I basically extruded. So I did another loop cut at the top of the building. So like, let's see, I did a loop cut here and I moved up. Not right there, like here. I moved up, and then I just selected the faces of this like line that's created right here. So under here, I selected these faces, and then I kind of extruded them forward. So again, extrude makes a new set of faces, right? So I extruded them forward, and then I press, if I can remember correctly, Z on my keyboard. And Z allows me to kind of move on whatever dimension I want, because it just normalizes my extrusion. And then I was able to extrude down. So again, if I had like a house, maybe that had like an awning, this would be really nice to have that come out. But that's like the process that I did for making that kind of lip in the roof. And then in the back, it was just a more narrow lip. But yeah,